Welcome to week 12 of HOS 121. This week we talk about psychosocial development in older adulthood, which would be age 65 and older, and end of life. And we start this lecture by talking about the story of our lives, which connects to Erikson's stage for older adulthood. And this is just a short lecture where we'll discuss, again, Erikson's stage of integrity versus despair and what relates to it. Erikson's stage for older adulthood is integrity versus despair, and the central issue is thinking about the question, has my life been meaningful? So this is a stage of life, older adulthood, when people are slowing down in some ways, their health is shifting, people whom they love may be dying, and will at some point, and they themselves are looking towards death. It's a time in life when there's more life behind you than ahead of you, unlike young adulthood. So it's a time when people start to really think about how they have lived. And Erikson described the importance of actively engaging in a life review. Just like with adolescents, they actively experiment with identity. Actually, thinking about one's life is an important thing to achieve a sense of integrity. And so integrity is when someone feels that they have lived the life that they had to live. Basically, they've come to terms with challenges they've had, they've made mistakes, but they see their lives as being meaningful and productive, and they accept themselves, and they affirm the decisions that they've made. Despair, on the other hand, is around blaming other people, externalizing one's problems, not taking responsibility for the choices that one has made and the mistakes, feeling a sense of meaningless. It can, involve feeling bitterness and regret around the choices and the path one's taken in life. But if one can get to integrity, there's this sense of, looking back and feeling satisfied with the way that you have lived, and knowing that you've done a good job of the life that you've had, which gives a strength that Erikson describes as wisdom, being able to feel a sense of purpose and calm with your own life, which reduces the sense of anxiety around death. So Erikson argued that people need to engage in a deliberate process of life review in order to reach this stage of integrity, where people can look back and feel satisfied with the choices and decisions they've made in their lives and the way they've lived their lives. So life review, I'll talk in a minute about a specific therapeutic technique that can be used to encourage someone to do this, but of course people often do this informally, so just reminiscing, talking about how things were in the past. Someone might, an older person may do this through telling stories to their relatives and giving an oral history of their backgrounds, and also reminiscing and just sharing anecdotes about family and experience. Or people may be doing something like writing an autobiography or participating in a structured life interview, something where they're really examining their past and thinking about how they have lived. So all of these types of things, storytelling, reminiscing, oral histories, guided autobiographies, writing them down, talking about them, all of those are examples of a life review process. So Erikson said of this process, this deliberate life review, that the goal is really for people to think about and then accept their life cycle and the choices they've made in their lives as really being the way it was meant to be. There could have been no substitution. There wouldn't have been my life if it had been a different marriage partner or a different career or a different place that I would live or a different child or all the various choices. This was the way it was meant. So that's a sense of integrity, is feeling satisfied with the choices one has made, and taking that in terms of being able to use that sense of security and satisfaction to confront death, knowing that one has lived one's life well. So given that this is a natural process, and again, people do it in informal ways like reminiscing and telling stories and writing autobiographies, there's also a method that can be used therapeutically. So this is something of particular relevance for people studying psychology or social work or other professions where you'd be working with people in a counseling kind of setting. You can do something that's called a structured life review, and that involves actually taking time and doing several sessions of about an hour with a set of questions that are used as guides, but just really they're about encouraging a person to reminisce and reflect. So it's not an interview like you're collecting data for a research project. It's an interview in the sense of getting someone talking, initiating a conversation, and asking them to begin at the beginning in terms of their earliest memories and then progress to the present. And along the way to talk about themes like their childhood, their family and their home, their adulthood and what happened in terms of partners and having children, occupation, where one's lived, friends, and then in the final piece is around asking the person to summarize and evaluate their life in its entirety. So having gone back and thought about the pieces, then reconstructing it as one long narrative of one's life. And as we talked about in week 5, we're always telling a story about our lives. There's a deliberate process that we may engage in at the end of life, but we really are doing it all along in terms of we tell ourselves stories to ourselves and to others about who we are. We tell stories when we show ourselves in a certain way on social media. We tell stories when we think about how the pieces of our lives fit together. So there's a lot of value in actually thinking intentionally about one's life story all along, and where one is going. So again, that's part of what we do, but in older adulthood, it's connected to the sense of developing a feeling of integrity about one's life. And reaching that sense of integrity and having a positive evaluation of one's life, whether in older adulthood or even now if you are thinking about the story of your life, is associated with a sense of subjective well-being. So, feeling good about yourself, feeling good about, choices you've made. So evaluating how you see your life and how people see their lives changes over time. It varies by certain factors. So, these are things like whether people, their marital status can influence how they feel subjectively in terms of their lives, kind of sense of mental resilience, how people see hardship. The quality of people's social networks influence how they see their lives. People attribute higher quality when they have more friends. Their physical health, and then their experience of stress. Those all relate as well. But we always have a sense of, how are you feeling in your life? Subjective well-being is connected to this idea of evaluating one's life and one's life story. So we'll leave that there, and we're going to pick up now on the next lecture discussing themes related to successful aging.